So you have a new book coming out this month. Congratulations. The
Thank
title
you.
is The End of the World is Just the Beginning, Mapping the Collapse of Globalization. And you don't mince words in this at all. In the introduction, you write or you say, we've been living in a perfect moment and it's passing. The world of the past few decades has been the best it will ever be in our lifetime. Instead of cheaper, better, faster, we're rapidly transitioning into a world that's pricier and worse and slower. Our world is breaking apart. That is pretty ominous sounding. Talk to me a little bit about what forces are driving this transition.
Well, I think it's good to talk about what forces created the world we know. The whole idea of globalization is that anyone can go anywhere at any time and interface with any partner, buy any commodity, ship into any market without needing a military escort. And that was something that was unheard of before World War II. The world used to be imperial. Well, the
Mm.
Americans created globalization, patrolled the global ocean so we could all do all these things, but it came at the cost of subjugating your security policies to the United States for the Cold War. We basically bribed up an alliance, and it worked. But the Cold War ended 30 years ago, and in this last 7 presidential elections, we've gone with the candidate who is less interested in globalization at large, and that includes the shift from Trump to Biden.
Mm.
Uh, the second big issue is demographics. One of the many, many unintended side effects of globalization is it enabled people to move off the farm and into the cities where they would participate in manufacturing and services jobs. Well, when you move into town, you have fewer kids because they're no longer free labor. They're more of a luxury good, if you will.
Mm.
You've placed that forward for 70 years. And in most of the advanced world, we now have more people in their 60s than their 50s than their 40s than their 30s. So the whole consumption and production cycles that we've become used to simply are no longer even mathematically possible. And we hit the tipping point this decade.
So let's talk about the sort of the globalization, in terms of American politics. Why are we turning away from that? What is it about that that's no longer working for Americans, or Americans are no longer buying into, which is the sort of premise that you lay out? Why the change in sentiment?
I'd give you a couple of reasons. First of all, because of the consumption shift globally, we are now maintaining a global system that costs money. I mean, patrolling the
Mm.
global oceans, keeping everyone from shooting at one another, that takes effort and time and money. And since there is no longer a security payback from the American point of view, the cost benefit analysis has really changed over the course of the last 30 years. And then, second, part of what made globalization work is the Americans would sublimate their own industry to encourage growth abroad. So ultimately, this has worked for us because we design the products, they build them. But some of the countries that are doing the building and are now more powerful than they would have been in a deglobalized world, China's at the top of that list, are
Mhm.
starting to have their own ideas about how the world should function. And to think that the Americans are going to subsidize the Chinese expansion over the long haul, that they're going to bleed and die so that the Chinese can import food and energy, that's a bit of a reach. And so we're seeing a
Mm.
broad adjustment through both American political parties that are turning against the very idea of an open global system.
So they don't wanna pay for it. Is there no is there no benefit to the American economy through that, though? I mean, we seem to have integrated so much into this idea of globalization.
There's definitely some upsides. It's kept inflation low for 40 years because we had these bottomless levels of Chinese demand that were making manufacturing goods on the cheap. Now, that cost us manufacturing jobs, but it did keep the cost of living on a global basis and in the United States lower than it would have been otherwise. The post Soviet collapse did something similar by dumping oil and nickel and everything else on the global market when their industry collapsed. They could still produce the raw commodities. So, from roughly 1985 until roughly 2015, this has been the highlight of globalization. This has been the high watermark, and it's been fantastic. We've seen record economic growth in the world writ large and strong economic growth in the United States as we focus on the things that we have a huge value added competitive advantage in.
Mm.
But everything is now changing. With the demographic profile shifting around the world, there aren't a lot of young people to do the consuming. And so the globalization process has become kind of a product dumping project for all of the foreign companies that are selling to the United States now. Because our baby boomers did something that no other baby boomers in the rest of the world did. They had kids. So, we can take the crap out of the millennials on a regular basis, and we should. But they've got something going for them that their cadres around the world don't. They actually exist. So American millennials are at the peak of their consumption right now. And in the rest of the world, there's not a whole lot left.
Mm. The demographic issue is so interesting to me because it's clear to see, and yet so few people talk about it. I mean, I know this is one of the things you base your view on. Is there something that we don't understand about it? Do we think it could be easily corrected? Why is this so important to you, and why doesn't it factor into some of the other macro frameworks out there?
Well, as the joke goes, demographics move at two speeds, glacial and lightning. We know exactly what's going to happen this year. It's going to be the majority of baby boomers will turn 65 and will go into retirement. That has investment and tax applications, consumption and production implications. And we've known this is coming since 1965, when the last of the baby boomers were born. But when something only takes place over decades, you always think, oh, we've got time to adjust that later. Well, we're in the here and now, and we're actually dealing with the complications coming from the baby boomers leaving us.
Yeah.
That is going to take us decades to deal with. And I can guarantee you there are no companies and no financial institutions, and certainly not the Federal Reserve, that are ready for this, even though we know that it's been coming for 40 years.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started out, there was an economist I interviewed, and they talked about the ticking time bomb of demographics, and literally no one, you couldn't get anyone to talk about it though, and I don't think you get elected. I don't think it works very well in politics when you deal with a long term problem. Like